Hello.
There he
Jim,
is.
Can you see me?
Yes, we can.
we
Can
can
you hear
see,
me?
well, you could be a little louder, but your instruments are very loud. We can hear them just looking at them in the background. Uh, your famous Fluba is quite evident there.
Oh, now he's muted. Make sure to unmute yourself.
Wait, well, then we could just talk about
There
it.
we go. Yeah, we can just talk about him.
Well, I am a computer idiot, so and completely challenged. But I never could see that intro if you had one. So I hope you didn't say anything terrible about me.
Oh, good. Well, now you can assume that we said only nice things.
Yeah.
How
Well,
are you, Jim?
I'm great. Yeah, my wife and I are fine. We've had tests, but it's been a month or so, so they probably don't matter now. But we're trying to take care of it, everything. I don't like the world I have to live in right now, though, for many, many reasons, and we don't need to get into them all.
Mm.
Of course.
It's an interesting time for musicians, for sure.
Sure.
Your main activity, I mean, we were just mentioning that since you didn't hear the introduction, that you're probably one of the most listened to or most heard tuba players in the world, but people wouldn't necessarily associate your name with the tuba because movies don't show the orchestra or the group or the band or put out the names of the individuals. So you've got a long list of things, but we'll get into that eventually. First is tell everybody where you are. First, we know you're in Los Angeles.
I'm in my
And
music room. I call it Basset Hall. I built it about 20 years ago in addition to my home, and it's big enough for concerts. We have concerts in here. Why don't you guys come out and play a Canadian brass concert here? We get 80 people in. That'll pay you a lot of money.
Okay, you're on. We'll play Renaissance music then.
Chuck, you got a gig. Yes.
Finally, after everything was scrubbed, we're pretty much down. There's still some concerts holding out, hoping they can get back in December, and one is actually in California. But I think from looking at a schedule this fall of about 40 concerts, there are only maybe half a dozen that are hanging on. And I think that's pretty much a universal conversation with any performer.
I play in four orchestras here: the Opera and the Pacific Symphony, Pasadena, and Hollywood Bowl Orchestra. Nothing probably likely for the whole year. There's a possibility of something mid-year if we get some kind of a vaccine. But audiences are scared to come out. You don't blame them.
Yeah.
And I don't think production companies want to take the risk.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
It's true. Okay, well, tell us a little bit about yourself. Were you born and raised? Are you like a Los Angeles person?
Oh no, I grew up in Oil City, Pennsylvania, a small town, northwestern Pennsylvania on the Allegheny River, and went to Indiana University of Pennsylvania to be a band director.
Nice.
I got my music ed degree there, and right after I finished, I went to a U.S. Army band concert and in Harrisburg, and I heard just on a lark, I went back and asked the principal tuba if there were any openings. She said, "Yeah, come on down." So I did.
What era was that? Who were your colleagues in the Army band?
Oh my God, it's amazing because it was Vietnam time. Uh, Paul Scott was the principal. There was another older guy named Leo Hurst, and then there was Chester Smiths, Dan Parentoni, and me, and I'm missing somebody. Oh yeah, Bob Palanch,
Right.
who was a great friend and mentor. And by the way, he's in the hospital probably.
Oh, too bad.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, that was a main name. Bob Planch was well known. I mean, he could, as everybody said, he could play anything, anytime, anywhere. And then Chester Smith is another one that could, you know.
I get there and Chester and I had about I don't know, a year or something like that together, and then Dan and I 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and of course those were close friends. Chester went on to the Boston Symphony right out of the Army band, and I went to the University of Tennessee after a year of freelancing around DC
Hmm.
and teaching a little bit in public schools, but taught at the University of Tennessee for 5 years as a tuba euphonium professor, built a whole program there.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then I started to go to USC in the summers to get a doctorate and studied with Tommy Johnson. And I came out here, and I eventually had to do a residency to get the doctorate. And so I took a year off without pay from Tennessee. Within a few months, I was making twice as much money, going to school full time, teaching a few students, and maybe an occasional playing job. And I said bye bye to Tennessee, and I've had 45 years of really wonderful experiences here. I came at the right time.
So did that just come gradually? I mean, people started hearing you play, and you also play, and I see the guitar right behind you. You play bass as well as tuba.
I was a very busy bass player when I first came here.
Uh-huh.
I had a lot of dance job, parties, rehearsals, all kinds of stuff. I knew a lot of tunes.
Yeah, nice. Well, I remember, I think one of the first times I met you and we were talking about what you do and how you do it and so forth. And you said that it was really a saving grace that you could double because the tuba itself would not have sustained the kind of career that you were starting to build.
Probably not. And in the 70s, television was really happening. There were Universal, one studio had 21 shows a week, I understand, with an orchestra. A lot of them didn't have tuba, but Tommy Johnson was as busy as could be. And I came at a time when I could be his sub. I was only here 2 weeks, and he sent me on a TV show. And I had a little tuba solo, went up to a B flat. I had my 184 Miraphone, I think, and went up to a B flat. And I did well, and this horn player comes up to me on a break and says, "Hey kid, you sounded good. You're going to do well in this town." David Duke. So that's how I got started. And slowly through the 70s, I got very busy. And because Tommy was a busy doubler on bass trombone, so was Don Waldrop, who was here. After I got my doctorate in '76, I put a summer into practicing the bass trombone, and I started taking gigs, and I made a ton of money, doubling, 50% more money in the studios.
Oh, good point. On the same gig.
Yeah.
What were some of the shows you were on? I'm sure people will suddenly immediately, so that was you.
Shows. Well, I subbed a lot for Tommy, and one of the ones I did a lot of was the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, and he worked on that all the time. That was a doubling gig, and they made music like that. I mean, it was like go in and sight read it and record it. It was fun stuff. You know, it might be bass trombone, a big band kind of a thing for a few bars, and 4 bars rest, pick up the tuba, have a nice pretty solo because maybe an elephant in love was in the cartoon.
Nice. That's
that
great.
Was fun. Later on, I did a lot of Star Trek episodes for several years, and then I did Scarecrow and Mrs. King. I did. I'd have to think about the ones. I didn't do a whole lot of shows for like long runs, but several Young Riders. Anyway, a bunch of them. And then just tons of single jobs, you know.
Right. And how about the movies?
Well, my first movie was important movie was Second Tuba with Tommy Johnson on oh my heavens, Taxi Driver.
Oh, no kidding. Excellent.
Nice.
Bernard Herrmann's last score. He was a famous Hitchcock composer, and we finished at Christmas Eve at 6 o'clock with the sessions, and he went home and died that night.
Oh gosh.
Anyway, that was my first movie, and but TV, we had a terrible time in 1980. TV, there was a strike for residuals in TV, and we lost big time. and TV was taken. They just started making up this. They did stuff with synthesizers, and they went to universities, and they went to Seattle and to non-union at the time, and so on. And they got their scores where they wanted to, and it's never recovered. And synthesizers, of course, were a huge thing.
Well, we saw that in Toronto, because Toronto was second for jingles, for example, to New York because of our Canadian content rules. You couldn't take a Coca-Cola ad from New York and play it in Canada. It had to be re-recorded. So it was a much smaller contingent, where New York, I think, had 60 guys running around town every day. Here they probably had 8 or 10, but it was a big deal. And the synthesizer just, it kind of reminded me of reading about the era when banjos, like you could actually go to college and get a degree in banjo, and suddenly the bottom just dropped out. And I guess that was about 1930, somewhere around there, 32. Suddenly people that were spending their lifetime studying the banjo, they weren't welcome. And sort of the synthesizer did that. All the studios, was it similar in LA? Because we had some wonderful studios here in Toronto, and I was just trying to think if there's even one left. All these really wonderful studios, they're now condo spots.
Big studios. Back in the 60s, 50s, there were what they call studio orchestras. All the MGM and Fox and Warner Brothers and so on. They had, I think it was 7 of them, had an actual symphony-sized orchestra on contract, and they weren't allowed to do work.
Oh,
They worked all the time. I made a great living. But those folded in the early 60s, and then television started taking off, and everybody became freelance, basically, at that point. Tommy became the tuba player for, of course, and changed the tuba world as far as I'm concerned.
yeah.
First guy to really play a lot of solos and played them well, and just have a lot of personality.
Well, I remember Tommy was invited. There was a big film date in Toronto, and everybody's excited. Oh, we have this fellow coming in from Los Angeles. This guy's amazing. He can read chord symbols. And they were so excited about the fact they could just hand him a piece of music with chord symbols, and he was going to do the job for him.
They said that about Tommy?
Tommy.
Okay.
I knew it. They should have hired me. I knew it.
Tommy's not a jazz musician and didn't. He may have been able to play oompa on the chord change.
Interesting.
I'm not putting him down, but
No.
Because he was amazing what he did. And,
Right.
About one of the very best I've ever heard. And
Okay, the big moment. You got to talk about the. I think 3 of you are on one movie together.
okay.
Was that the third? What, Raiders of the Third Kind? I always forget.
Close Encounters.
Close Encounters.
Well, that's a great studio story. The movie was made and during the year of '76, and I'd only been here a couple of years, but I got a call from, I think it was Warner Brothers, that John Williams needed me for a session, double session, and could I do it? And I said, of course. Well, Tommy was on vacation. He was his tuba player at the time. He was on vacation in Hawaii, I believe, but he couldn't get back for one day's work or something. And so I did it. It turned out to be the conversation, which is the dialogue between the tuba. It's actually 4 instruments, contrabassoon and tuba in unison, and 2 oboes in unison. The contrabassoon and I, that's why it sounds kind of electronic. That rasped everything. And then we were the voice of the mothership, and then they did the 2 oboes with the voice of the earth. And it so happened the whole movie that was a pre-score. It was made before the movie was made, and they actually filmed it, so it was timed to be this part.
Wow.
And the brilliance of John Williams and Steven Spielberg to communicate with aliens by music.
Right.
Peaceful thing. Most of the time, aliens, they want to make wars. So we were, I just think it was brilliant. And it so happened the next year we scored the whole movie, and there were three tubas on it, Tommy and me and another guy. And then it came out, but it came out the same year as Star Wars 1, and they were both up for Academy Awards, so it didn't Academy Award. That's just everything in a nutshell.
Wow.
Well, that's I think we really became aware of you because we really hadn't bumped into each other yet. I don't think, Washington and so forth, we hadn't bumped into each other. But when that movie came out, it was so obvious. This fine tuba playing on the bottom. Okay, who's that? Who's that? Who's that? And knowing it was more than one. And that kind of set the stage. And I think,
just, these are breaks.
mm-hmm.
I had a break,
Right.
And anyway, my whole career that had something to do with my future work. Just a little bit of attention. Certain contractors start paying principal pay and things like that, and of course, I was Tommy's sub, and two of it. Don Walter did some work, and Roger Bobo did some too.
Mm-hmm.
But he was busy in the Philharmonic, and anyway, I had a certain, I guess, a jazzy influence in my playing, and in 1990, when he scored Home Alone, John, he asked me to do it, and it was all full of tuba solos, many tuba solos, and they were a little bit jazzy, and from that point on, I was his principal for 25 years.
Wow. Yeah, I was going to actually ask you about both those things. So it's like, for example, like Home Alone, I've played with, because a lot of orchestras have started to do that around the holidays. And, when you first get the part, you listen along with the movie, and those tuba solos are just played so beautifully. And it's one of those things where it's just like, the player on this is incredible. I'd love to hear you talk about your relationship with John Williams, because you've played his concerto with him conducting, correct?
I played the third movement only.
Okay.
Yes, I did. The Pacific Symphony had a concert, I forget, 25th anniversary. John was involved with the Pacific Symphony a lot here in town, and his connection with Carl St. Clair, our conductor, was great. So they split a concert, Carl and John Williams conducting, and so they featured, I think, 4 of the principal players, and they had me play the last movement of it. That was a stretch for me, I can tell you, but it was
good stuff.
It went well, and I'm good memory.
And then, he just seems like such a kind individual. There's this video that went viral of him, there's a very young trumpet player playing the theme to Star Wars outside of his house. And then, I don't know if he heard it or whatever, but he came out and said, like, thank you for playing my music. I really appreciate it. And just like for a man of that sort of stature to come down and just sort of talk to a young, he just seems like the nicest guy.
He is easily the nicest man in the business.
Wow.
Always a very polite, friendly guy. I had lunches with him many times on sessions where we sat there and ate our box lunch and chatted about all kinds of stuff. We chatted about composition, because I got into that a lot in recent years. We talked about everything you can imagine, and he was just open to me and to everybody.
We're going to get into your composing prowess, but let's talk a little more just how the freelance jobbing world changed, and how what kind of life was that for you, waiting for the phone to ring when they used to have telephones, I guess? Or
I don't know. I didn't have quite the pressures that maybe somebody with a family. I could afford not to get some work for times, and it was anyway. I was not afraid to take chances, I guess you could say, but it wasn't bad. Even in the 6 years between I did 39 movies in 1979, and I didn't get back up to that amount for 6 years. And during that time, that's how long, and then movies became big deal, not television. Thanks to John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith and a few other of the great people of that time. And I was in the thick of that, James Newton Howard, and all of a sudden I started getting first call for these guys. And so I had a good 25 years or so of first call tuba work in the movies. And so I was really never out of work almost my entire life.
So are you watching the, with interest, are you watching the American Federation of Musicians retirement plan going downhill, or are you grandfathered ahead of that?
Well, number one, I have a pension, a good pension, thanks to the union, and I'm very proud of that. But yes, they made probably some mistakes when they made what they call the multiplier, and it was a little high. And yes, we're going to be adjusted. I'm going to get a cut in my pension. The younger people are only getting 1%. We got as much as 4.5%, I think, at different times. Percent it's a complicated number, but it's a real problem. And until we get a new Congress, we're not going to maybe solve it.
So I'm kind of curious in Los Angeles. I know a lot of friends from school. A lot of people had gone to Los Angeles. It was the Mecca, of course, for films, for both performing and for writing. Did you actually get into writing, doing some of the work like Maple Jingles or films?
I was never a film writer, no. I never pursued it, to be honest. And I mean, I had a few chances to maybe do some student film or something like that for free. And it's a very complicated field.
Mm-hmm.
Orchestration, the recording end of it, and young people, they have to spend a lot of money just to break in, get their name known, and get somebody to hire them. No, I just didn't. I had plenty to do, and composition and jazz have been my hobbies, if you will. I never made any real money at them, but I love them, you know, and that's important in life too.
You've also made several recordings, and I think at great, well, it'd be a great deal of time and energy, but also probably at your own expense, I think, very often.
Oh yeah, my own expense for sure.
Yeah.
And, I never really made any money at it, but I've got a legacy of 17, working on 18 albums out there now. Nothing like the Canadian Brass, which is the gold star of recording in the music world, but there's something there, you know, and I'm pretty much proud of almost all of them. And I also grew through them as a player. I became a better player because that's how I did it. You know, I would plan the project and then put the band together, record it, learn hard things were too hard for me, and so on.
So Jarrett and I have kind of made a point of not getting into, we're much more interested in the thinking behind the music and how people, you know, started doing what they're doing and all that, and staying away from, you know, I play this instrument or I have this mouthpiece, or, you know, the kind of technical stuff. But nobody that's watching this can help but notice the instrument right behind you. And I think you're going to have to tell us about that.
You have to.
The Fluba?
Yeah.
The Fluba.
Is that what you mean?
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
Well,
Yes.
Fluba is something I had Rob Stewart made for me. I just, you know, I like to play jazz, and I wanted a tuba-sized flugelhorn, and he basically blew up a flugelhorn for me, and used Yamaha parts pretty much, and it came out just wonderful. It's a great instrument, and it's compensating in F, which is, but for some reason I just pretend I'm Clark Terry or something like that.
Nice.
I know I'm not, but I pretend, and it's something that's very fluid about it. I've used it on my jazz records, and believe it or not, I've used it twice with the Pacific Symphony on the bear solo in Petrushka,
Wow.
because the sound projects out to the audience. See? And it's got a great high register. It's very secure. I don't play beat-low anymore, but if I ever had to, that's the instrument I'd try to talk them into letting me do it on, because
Wow.
it's so easy up high, you know.
What
And,
did the conductor say of this, giant bell sort of in their face? I'm sure they were scared.
well, the two times I did it, with both times we had guest conductors, young people, and they want to be called back. They want the musicians to give them a good rating, and so they let me do it. And the management liked it, and the other brass players liked it.
Wow.
So anyway, it's just a good story.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I did this contemporary opera in Europe a couple of years ago by Stockhausen called Inori. And there's this big kind of like 2-minute long tuba solo. And in the part, the composer wrote that you should have a sousaphone bell put inside of the tuba to get sort of that like raspy, like loud, like sound. And the conductor actually wanted me to play sousaphone just for this like loud exposed part. But I feel like something like that, where the bell's facing forward, would be perfect for that. And also like, a recording bell tuba, for example. I mean, but it's just so cool that you can use that instrument, like that it's actually a good instrument,
I've as much as I've yacked about it, I've never had to do it on a film or a TV show or anything. But it doesn't matter. It's a matter of again, it's a hobby, but it's a great instrument. It's going to be in a museum someday, or certainly played by other players, I hope.
Oh, I think Jarrett's probably going to line up, start the line now.
Give me a call. I'll be there.
By the way, Jarrett, I looked you up a little bit, and you have quite a resume for such a young man too.
Thank you.
Hope to get to know your playing. Okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we're proud of a Canadian trained tuba player blazing a trail. This is fun to watch.
Well, Chuck, you would know as much as anybody. When we were young, the tuba world was nothing. Sleep in the deep and bad transcriptions of trumpet solos to play and things like that. And it's come up from Von Williams and Hindemith to enormous amount of stuff now. And when Roger Bobo and Mel Culbertson and Bob Tucci went to Europe, they trained a whole army of Europeans after the war and brought them back to, and now there's some of the greatest players are in Europe. And the same thing happened in Japan. All these young people came to America to study. We taught the world how to play the tuba, and now they're teaching us how to play it.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned to Jarrett a couple times, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I like to look at the various YouTubes. I mean, it's just astonishing what people are doing on the tuba, and I keep saying, well, I'm sort of glad I'm on this side of the career because I can take pride in it. It's great.
By the way, I wanted to mention something before she leaves. Back in the background, here's my wife, Jamie, who's been a wonderful partner for almost 40 years now. And she's just went like this. And she's suffered with my ego and everything else all this time.
Nice.
And I love her a lot. So anyway,
Beautiful.
she has to leave right now. But,
No,
okay.
we can't see her. We can't quite. No, there she is. Yep. Okay. So.
That's a really good point to acknowledge. And I don't think we've actually talked to very many people about this, but our profession can do a number on personal relationships. And I think that, it just takes so much patience on behalf of both partners, I think, to sort of patience on our end, with our careers, but also patience with our partners to sort of stick with us and, all the tuba sounds coming from all the time. So that's incredible and a great testament to both of your ability to keep the relationship strong all these years.
She's an amateur violinist, and I think has more fun doing that than anything in the world, playing in little community orchestras for free, but she works at it and she loves it. So she has musical ears.
I think that's one of the things that has not been promoted enough in schools, particularly maybe through the early years, is that not everybody it has to be streamed into either professional music or nothing. That Europe had it strongly in the family, households full of music was just a norm. And somehow the band programs that started here, really very North American centric, have been very strong and produced a lot of musicians, but it seems to be a tremendous fall off after high school. And we've noticed, and I'm curious what you found, that same thing, that we look at in the audience, and very often a fellow here, James Campbell, a clarinetist, had a statistic for us that some 60 or 70% of your audience will be made up of people that did play in high school bands or orchestras, but they're not playing now. And that's something I think was a serious flaw, and something that now in this era, everybody's at home anyway. Time to get those instruments back out of the closet and start playing.
Some are doing it, and you'd be surprised what I'm doing for fun right now. See that back there? I'm taking rock and roll guitar lessons.
Wow.
I happen to live on a little private street in the Hollywood Hills, and there's 3 well-known musicians here. Doug Webb is a great jazz saxophone player right on this little street of about 10 houses. And there's a wonderful rock and roll guitar player, Steve Pfister, who travels all over the world, and he's given me Zoom lessons on rock and roll. I was a guitar player first in my life, and a bad one, so I became a bass player. But it's sort of bringing back some stuff, and I'm learning and applying it to the tuba.
Wow. What is coming back? So I'm sort of thinking about like the movie industry and the TV industry and recording and the recording industry. What does that look like coming back from COVID? Is it similar to the orchestra world, or are they sort of making adjustments?
Well, they're actually doing a little bit right now. Doug Tornquist is the hot tuba player now. My former student and colleague at USC and so on, a great player. And but there's almost no work for more than one tuba player. And it's just, of course, there never was a lot of work. Tommy and I did the majority of it, but there were never more than, at least in the last 50 years, there may have been a fair amount back in the 40s when they had bigger groups, but not now. And so these guys have all got Pro Tools setups in their home, and they are actually recording, overdubbing movie scores. A whole 80-piece orchestra did it that way. And it's amazing. And Doug is doing a fair amount of little things, like adding a tuba piece part on a TV show or something like that. And there's a bunch of the first call quote players that do that. And right now the union is they're paying them right and everything. That I worry like heck about this, because maybe I shouldn't even say it, but composers or producers could go to Bangladesh and get it done for $20 a day, you know. And said there's good tuba players all over the world, and they're, you know, and it could kill the business if it's not close to being killed already.
Do you think this, I mean, sort of, you know, global pandemic situation, do you think that'll move? Like, do you think recording from your home studio is something that will happen in the future, or do you think like once things are safe again, people will really want to get back into the studio?
I think they'll get back. I don't
Okay.
know how complicated it'll be, but you know, there's been a steady decline for 30 years, really, in the business with electronics. John Williams wouldn't dream of making what they call a temp score. He scores live, every musician in the room at the same time. That's so rare these days. You go to a movie session with Hans Zimmer or many other people who are talented and stuff. They'll record the strings and maybe the woodwinds, and then they'll add the brass and percussion later. And it's unreal. And if they want, they can take that temp score, which everything's on synthesizer now. They can take that temp score and just throw out the whole symphony. And have a movie. Sometimes that's happened. One of the greatest sins I ever thought in the music business was in a movie called Chariots of Fire. Won the Academy Award for Music, and it was a complete synth score. So you know what the judges, they don't know.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Goodness.
I don't want to be on my hobby horse about things that are negative, but
No, it's really important to acknowledge, and I think it's so. One thing that I wanted to ask you is that, for example, these studio musicians don't have the ability to get tenure like orchestra musicians. So I imagine there's quite a bit of trepidation and apprehension with some of these musicians to perform at the highest level every single day. And I mean, I'm not saying that that's not the case for musicians who have tenure in orchestra, but I mean, how does that sort of play into your day to day?
Number one, in the studios, you've always had to go in and sight read. I never got music ahead of time. Some of the hardest things I played, Hook, this big solo in Hook for John Williams. I went out to lunch and it was on the stand when I came back. And it was the first thing he called up. I didn't have a minute to look at it. It's a tough solo, high and chromatic. It came off great, but I just feel I'm so lucky. But that's been the standard, and that's why the best readers and the best people that can make it sound good right away. And these days, since everything's on computer, they even record all the rehearsals, just in case they might get a good piece from that. And then they put it in the movie or the TV show, and you got to be ready. Now, one of the side things for this, for our students, particularly at USC, which are all sort of interested in being in the movies, if they could, they want to be the next Tommy Johnson or Jim Self or Doug Tornquist or something. But they're doing their stuff online now. They're doing, we're teaching them, I guess, or to take lessons and to do overdubbing things, so they have to play perfectly. And it's amazing some of the stuff that's coming out. And Chuck has done a million recordings, and he knows the complexities of recording, and he knows the difference between overdubbing and live playing and the value of it and so on. But producers don't.
It was a big change, really big changeover. I remarked to one of my colleagues recently that, we've been very fortunate, I'd say even blessed, to have these fantastic producers over the years. When we were at RCA, Jay Sachs was producing the Philadelphia Orchestra and the Cleveland Quartet and so forth, and he was our producer. And we'd try to have a meeting in his room. We couldn't all five fit because of all the Grammys. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, this guy was so successful. So moving from that to me trying to learn how to use, here I'm at home with got a proper mic, and I'll probably try to get it set up. But having to do this yourself, it just seems like, it kind of went backwards. And I think this is what we're all kind of facing, is that, coming out of these fantastic situations. And certainly the whole studio scene, the 70s was the heyday for everyone. And then the synthesizer changed everything just almost overnight. And now there's been and I don't know if you've heard these new sounds coming out. I think it was the Smart Music people, the company that came up with Finale for music processing and so forth. They've got a reproduction system now. Usually you'd get a sample, a composer or a writer sends you something and say, well, you can listen to it and it always sounds terrible. Suddenly it's within, I'd say 85 or 90% of sounding like a live performance coming off of a computer. So there's more to come. I mean, we're not finished with this yet. It's amazing what's happening.
So sampling is not very good yet for brass, but it's pretty darn good for strings and woodwinds and percussion. Mm-hmm. And but it's still good enough for brass that people steal your stuff all the time. And so I don't know where it's going to go. My career is over. I pretty much.
Hardly. I don't know if I know you work with Yamaha, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but when we were working with the Yamaha folks, we were in Japan, and they asked us, they said, well, this might be fun. Would you mind coming into the studio? Each one of you individually come in the studio. And I don't know, I think they might have given us a equivalent of $100 or something. I can't remember what it was. It was nothing. And it was a very strange session. And I recall they just said, well, just start on the lowest note you can play and just play chromatic to the highest note you can play. Well, little did we know, I think we were the brass sound on those original synthesizers.
Well, you should have been paid for it, see, but that's what never happened. I regret doing it one time on a session too, here in LA, all these top players, and I regret it. I did it on. It Doug and I. Doug played tuba and I played chimbasel, and I'm embarrassed. I did accepted it, and there are other real good tuba players around that have done sampling sessions, and they're out there, and nobody gets paid for it. We were supposed to get paid.
Well, we didn't even know. I mean, the original, and you're probably in the same boat. We didn't even know what we were being asked to do yet. That was the main problem. We thought, well, maybe they're tuning their equipment or something. Who knows what they were doing? We never really even discussed it. And then it was years later that we said, hey, wait a minute. I think I know what that was. It took that long even to register.
That's everything we do. If you know, you certainly know this, that everything is on YouTube or on Spotify. I never gave permission for all 18 of my albums to be on Spotify. I have in recent years because it's the only way to get anybody listening at all. But my earlier albums were never given permission, and but they're all there.
Well, I have two thoughts about that. Maybe I'd like to hear your comment. In the original days of our group, when we were making LPs, we would put a bunch of LPs in the trunk of a car and drive off to do our various engagements. And we were hoping to break even because we felt this was really great that someone would buy a record, take it home and maybe play it, even just have the picture, put their album on the shelf for a few days and just see our picture, that it was a way to get the music out and get people hearing our music. And then there was this funny period of time where we all musicians thought we could make money doing this. And I guess that would probably be the 80s and 90s. And I feel like we're kind of back to the same place, but in a better place. Because if breaking even was the goal then and not making money now, but for us, for example, we have people, we're getting comments all over the world, places we've never been. Africa, for example, we've never toured in Africa and we've got fans there. One of our South America, I think we've only played 3 or 4 concerts north of the equator. And that's one of our biggest, you can watch the stats and see that that's our biggest fan base. So in a sense, the internet is very good for musicians from a musical standpoint, not necessarily financial standpoint.
In your case, you can go out and play concerts and make money and do tours and get all over the world. I could never really do that. I don't have the right kind of act, if you will, but I've done a little bit of it. But yes, it works for something of the stature of the Canadian brass. Absolutely.
Well, I would think for you too, though, Jim, that people can hear you, where they would, that they would have to head in the old days. They'd have to be in Los Angeles at a specific place at a specific time. And now your records are everywhere.
That's true, and I appreciate it. And I've had lots of good feedback and so on, and occasionally some gigs from it.
Mm-hmm.
But colleges or something maybe, or conferences, different places where they paid me, but it's been, well, I don't know. I told myself when I was young that I was not going to get old. I mean, what I meant by that is become
jaded.
Well, yeah, become a conservative. I'm a liberal. I would not become a conservative person. And I'm so frustrated myself because of the level of speed in the movement, and I can't keep up with my students.
Mm-hmm.
And I try not to be. I mean, I'm okay. Don't get me wrong, but it's even this meeting today is a little bit of a challenge.
Well, Jarrett, I'm curious from your point of view. So here's Jarrett, not even 30 yet, so we can still trust him. Wasn't that when you couldn't trust someone over 30? At any rate,
I think so.
Are you feeling just from this kind of conversation, is this making you apprehensive about the future, or are you thinking, well, okay, there's going to be different ways, and I'm here to figure it out?
Me?
I was thinking Jarrett.
I think the biggest hurdle I think right now for orchestras and various chamber groups is, trying to bring our craft to the internet and finding a way to monetize it when there are things like YouTube out there where somebody can pull up a recording with the New York Philharmonic, Berlin Philharmonic, some of the greatest recordings in the world for free. And how does, a chamber group, looking forward, how do we sort of monetize our product with all this incredible stuff out there? And I look at a group like the Berlin Philharmonic, who before the pandemic had an extremely robust infrastructure in the digital concert hall, and they have all of their concerts virtually from the past 20 years on this space, recorded at an extremely high level and with very high production value, so that if somebody wants to listen, they can listen, but they can also watch. And it's like very captivating what they're doing with the camera work and like how you can see various instruments playing together. So I think that's the biggest hurdle right now, and trying to basically compete with these services where you can go on YouTube and listen to everything basically for free. So I think it's going to take something, a big shift, I think, for groups to do that and to be able to make a livelihood on the internet.
Every orchestra is suffering with this. I played 4 of them, and they struggle with budgets, of course, and audiences. I have a good feeling, though, once we're over this pandemic, that the audiences will come back big time. The Hollywood Bowl, where I play in the summers, 18,000 people, and it's often sold out. Night after night after night. The LA Philharmonic is losing $80 million this year because they produced the whole thing, and because it's completely closed. And but I've always thought that live music is still maybe not big audiences, but there's people that just they get off on it.
That gave me I'm just curious. Hollywood Bowl. So, Bramwell Tovey, you've performed with Bramwell?
I have, but
he's a cherished Canadian conductor from England, of course.
Great,
but
he's great, very talented.
Isn't he amazing? Yeah.
In every way, he's one of those what I would call a Renaissance man, and he's conducted. I played in the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra, which is kind of a secondary orchestra, and we do. These recent years, we've just done pretty much pops concerts and backing up rock bands, and there's a lot of it is not musically very satisfying, but it's a cool job. It's always great musicians and the vibe, I guess.
Yeah, just driving past the marquee is exciting.
Yeah, and of course I am astounded when I hear all these rock concerts with famous. Sometimes they're not very famous to me, but it seems like everybody in the audience knows their music. They play 2 bars of a song and they're all raving about it on their feet. Yeah. And the songs are 4 chords or 3 chords or boring, 1 chord, I don't know. But audiences, they love words for one thing, more than instrumental music.
I'm wondering if you can, as just sort of trying to shift gears here towards the end of our talk, I'm just sort of wondering if this is sort of hard for you to look back on an extremely, long and successful career of recording for movies and TV shows. Is there one soundtrack that you want everyone to hear, just like that you want everyone to hear the tuba writing and that you're just very happy with?
Well, on my website, I've got 300 listed that either have my solos on them or I thought were good scores. And somebody can look at that, jimself.com. Close Encounters is the biggest one, of course, but the John Williams movies like Hook and Home Alone 1 and 2, and one other big one for me was Jerry Goldsmith's score to Dennis the Menace with Walter Matthau, packed full of tuba solos. And I had a couple of things I wanted to I didn't want you to miss today, if you have a moment for me to tell them. Okay. Number one, I'm a Yamaha guy, and a great point thanks to Chuck Dollenbach, because he played this, I guess, the first 4-quarter C tuba, and I pushed them like hell to make an F tuba. and I eventually bought one of your tubas, Chuck, but with a fifth valve, the first one. And I still own it, but and then I pushed them real hard to make F tubas and to make them in that setup where the low notes sound good. And that's directly related because I liked the way he sounded on that horn, and he made it so musical. And anyway, that's one thing. Another thing, jazz is a very big thing in my life. I write. My latest album is a duo album, and I'm just learning and growing, and it's such a satisfying thing. But the other thing is composition, which is, I wish I had done it when I was 20. I didn't start till I was almost 50. And because I thought you had to be a Mozart to write. And I finally discovered that you just put down one note, and you add another note, and then you add another note. The computer helped. The computer programs helped. And from that point on, I've got like 80 titles now, and I did want to mention Chuck has a copy of this because I gave him one. It's my quintet album, which is all 20 years of composition. It's called Flying Circus. It's put out by Potenza, and it's 25 top brass players in Los Angeles, including an antiphonal brass quintet, and a piece with marimba solo, and a piece with drums and piccolo trumpet. It's 20 years of writing music for brass quintet, and I'm a musicaholic, so I just wanted to get
Nice,
those plugs in, if you don't mind, for my stuff.
Indeed, and we shared a post there for a while in Santa Barbara, and I think you're still involved in that academy, which has been a wonderful opportunity, I know, for you to meet up with some of the finest musicians. They can draw from anywhere in the world, and of course,
I'm not there anymore, but I'm of course close with David Keene, my buddy, and you are too. Sure.
Yeah.
And
It's really great. So, okay, I'm curious now, Jarrett, are you encouraged about the future, or are you worried?
I mean, I think what Jim said about people just like, we're never going to be able to stop people from wanting to go see live music. And I think that's just the biggest thing, because if that goes away, then of course, I think we're in trouble. But when orchestras come back, I do really feel like people will want to go listen, because it's just that, being together and like listening to people produce something beautiful. And also, I mean, literally the physical vibrations of like people making sounds on stage and like feeling that. I mean, there's studies everywhere of that increasing endorphins and increasing dopamine in the brain, and that just makes you happy. So I really think that that's encouraging. I mean, the world is very dark in a lot of ways right now, but I think just the fact that people will want to come back and hear music, I think is really keeping me going and making me want to practice.
Nice. Well, I have one last question for you, Jim, and that's looking at your instruments. Where are the gold-plated instruments?
what's that?
Where are the gold-plated instruments?
I don't have your income.
No,
No, I never had a gold-plated instrument.
I thought that Yamaha had sent you gold-plated horns.
No, they never did.
Oh, you better ask him for it, because they built a special. Reynolds Schilke in Chicago, it was his dream to have a full set consort of instruments, top to bottom, piccolo to tuba, all made by one like Stradivarius. It was going to be the Schilke set, which he made for us, and all gold-plated.
Right.
And the tuba was a challenge because it had to be gold-plated in two sections. The company in Indiana didn't have a tank big enough, and he managed to do that and put it together. And it turned out, when I asked him later how he did it, he actually glued it together. So he didn't want to put heat on it and ruin the gold. And it's still to this day as solid as possible. So Yamaha looked at it and said, well, I guess we have to make a tank. They didn't realize what he'd gone through to do it. So Yamaha created a tank big enough to gold plate tubas. So I think they should be sending you some of these.
Well, they've given me a bunch of instruments over the years. I've been involved intimately with the 822 F tuba.
Yeah.
I bought one of the first 5-valve 621 F tuba and played it for a long time. And then I was involved in getting the bigger tuba made and also the Yamaha big time. I worked with them on this. And now there's a 4/4 just about ready to come out. They've approved the prototypes, and it's been a long time coming, but never a home instrument for me, and that's okay. I haven't noticed a great difference I mean, the players that play them are also good usually. It must be expensive and very heavy. Is it heavy?
Not at all. I mean, it's micro thin. It's less than a third of a human hair of gold.
Oh wow! Well, anyway, it's very cool. I'll never forget the concert you guys played at the Sapporo Tuba Conference, which was there, where Yamaha or somebody made you a set of tubas with the bells going up on the flugelhorns or something, and
Yep.
alto horn and bass euphonium and tuba, and you played music on that. It was
There was a fellow at Yamaha that could not. He just didn't want to send us off to a tuba convention in Japan without having all tubas. So he took a flugelhorn. That's why it's interesting you have the Fluba back there. He took a flugelhorn and turned it upright, and he wanted that to be the small tuba. And that, frankly, that was probably one of the finest instruments they ever made down there.
I just remember it sounded great. What a cool sound, and I've used in my own writing in one of my quintets, the second movement, I use all conical instruments, euphonium. Well, yeah, euphonium, tuba, two flugelhorns. I did use a French horn, so.
Oh, that's pretty conical.
That's bigger.
Jim, this has been great, and I just wanted to add one last thing. I just think that so your company is Basset Hound Music, and Gene Picorni has 4 Basset Hounds. Sergio Carolino has a Basset Hound. Is there a connection between being really successful at the tuba and owning Basset Hounds, or what's up with that?
Of course. No, I had one since 1970. And I've had them for 50 years. Unfortunately, we don't have one now, first time in my life, but we're sort of tired of taking care of them. I can't travel and so on. And the house smells better. But but I got a whole bunch of guys interested. Gene's one of them. Sergio's another one. The guy at Melbourne Symphony, briefly slips my name, but my mind, but he has one. All these guys have become Basset. It must be the tuba player's dog. I don't know. But it certainly makes you a better tuba player.
It's like that thing where, like, if you see someone winning job and you're like, oh, I have to have that horn. It's like, now, Jim Self is a really good tuba player. I got to get a Basset Hound.
Well, I have a feeling that's not going to happen, but
give it time. Give it time.
Well, they're cool. They're like, Basset Hounds. I don't know. You put your hand down and they'll lift their head, and pretty soon their whole body. They're the most relaxed people. They're like they're stoned all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just, they're my kind of dog. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, kudos to you for what you've done for I was going to say the tuba world, but the music world, and really your perseverance and your love of music and dedication. It's just amazing. And I'm so glad to have you join us.
I'm lucky, and I'm lucky to have been around people like you, Chuck. And we're the same generation pretty much, but I don't know anybody that's had a more incredible career than you have. And you've had a good marketing talent and all that stuff, which really helps. But the most important thing is you play great.
Oh, you're very kind.
You're
very
still
kind.
doing that. But it encourages all of us that are a little bit older here.
Well, it's all been fun. Thanks so much. I really was looking forward to talking with you, and a really nice conversation. And just the fact that you've kind of done it all from teaching in universities, playing in the Army band, and everything you've done in Los Angeles is just exemplary. So thanks so much for joining us. Thank you, Jarrett. This has been really a nice conversation. So hang in there and keep doing it.
Cheers, Jim.
Thanks.